Hello and welcome to Why and How, a video podcast that explores, two questions: why and how. In particular, I'm going to be talking to people about why they choose certain interests or hobbies, and hopefully I'm going to connect with people who have translated those passions into success so that I can pick their brains and figure out how they were able to take something they loved into a lifelong career. Now, let's get to my why behind this and what I do. The why of this particular podcast is that there was a younger version of me who did not benefit from spectacular career day chats. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Alberta, Canada, where the options for, different things were limited. And so career day chats were often somebody's parent or guardian who volunteered a couple of minutes to step in a classroom and tell us about the wonderful world of, mundane things. There were no artists, writers, illustrators to come inspire us. And so I wound up being, how shall I put it? Without a lot of ambition. Let's put it that way. The only thing I cared about was making up stories, adventures for Dungeons and Dragons so that my friends could go on quests. I didn't really think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, but my parents, they were thinking about it, and they decided when I was in grade 12 that I should do what their family friends' kids were doing, which was they were in university for engineering. And my marks in math and science were pretty good, so I kind of thought, well, I guess I'm good at math and science, so I guess that's my career path. Unfortunately, if you go into something without your heart in it, very quickly it becomes, abysmal. And in the first year in university, I hated what I was doing. I didn't focus, I didn't concentrate, I didn't study, and of course, it showed. By the end of the first year, I received what's called the Dean's Vacation, which is basically a polite way of saying, see you later. So I had a year to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I came across an epiphany. And that epiphany was, wait a minute, I'm going to spend 30, 40, 50 years doing something. Maybe I should do something I actually enjoy. So I actually started thinking about the things that I like doing now, as a teenager. And the one thing I hit upon was the idea that I loved creating quests and adventures, stories for my friends. And it was that point that I realized what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer. And so, in that year off, I saved enough money so I could go back to university, and I attended the University of Alberta with a major in English and a minor in drama, and I never looked back. Immediately after I graduated, I was able to land a job writing press releases and speeches for politicians in the government. Then I started writing for theater, and then I moved over to radio and television. And in the last 20 years, I've been writing books for kids. And actually, that leads to another why, and that why has to do with why do this as a video podcast. Well, it turns out that I wrote a book called Izzy Wong's Nose for News. It is a book about Izzy Wong, who is a podcast journalist covering the beat at her elementary school or middle school. And she comes across what she believes is a crime that needs to be solved. And so using her podcast skills and reporting skills, she tries to figure out who committed the crime. Now, since my main character of the novel was doing podcasts, I thought, you know what, maybe I should show my level of expertise with podcasting and try to make my own podcast. But I didn't want to just do a podcast about writing because, my YouTube channel already has some writing tips for kids. So instead, I wanted to turn to the younger version of me, the one who could have benefited from having somebody come in and do maybe a really cool career day chat to inspire me to pursue a path and not waste a couple of years in engineering and that gap year where I had to think about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So this podcast is basically for those people at the beginning of their careers where there are many paths laid out and you're trying to figure out which path to take. I'm hoping to interview some cool people who will talk about their passions, their interests, and their careers so that you get sort of a more full picture of what a particular road can take you toward. Now, full disclosure, I am mostly interested in the creative arts. So the first few podcasts, I'm going to focus on talking to authors, artists, illustrators, actors, performers, musicians, because that's my interest, right? And I want to do something that I like. But if the series takes off and continues, of course, I will broaden my field in terms of who I interview. In fact, if you've got ideas of people that I should interview for this podcast, post it in the comments. I'm more than happy to take any suggestions. No trolling though, but I will take a look and see if I can broaden my horizons, see if I can reach out to people. Of course, naturally, because of technology today, I can interview people across the world as long as I figure out the time zone. Now, the first guest for my podcast is somebody who's right next door to me. Well, almost next door. He's in the next province. I live in Alberta, Canada, and my guest lives in Saskatchewan. Actually, he was raised on a ranch near the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan, but he didn't become a rancher. He wound up becoming a young adult author. His name is Arthur Slade, and he has a number of fantastic books, and I emphasize fantastic because he does focus on writing fantasy. He's also, from what I understand, a huge heavy metal fan, which we'll ask him about. But he's also a unique hybrid author where he has one foot in the world of traditional publishing and one foot in the world of indie publishing or self-publishing. Now, very quickly, quick primer for those of you who are not aware of the difference between the two. A traditionally published author is somebody who goes to a company that's specifically trying to find stories to publish so they can send them out to bookstores and put them up for awards. The company takes the financial risk and puts the book together. They also take a big chunk of the profit. The author usually gets between 10 to 15% in terms of royalties of sales, right? So the traditional route is a company that is putting out stories. The indie route or self-published route is where the author is the one who publishes their own stories, and they're the ones who take the financial risk, and they have to hire the book designer, the cover artist, they have to find the printing company, they have to get up a distribution deal to get the book into bookstores. Now, when my guest, Arthur Slade, was going into the world of self-publishing, it was a lot harder. But now with the advent of technology and ebooks, it's gotten a little easier, and Art will sort of talk about this in terms of how he sort of is able to piece together his career as a hybrid author. Now, a couple of things that you want to know about Arthur Slade, other than he's a heavy metal fan, is one of his books won the Governor General's Award for Children's Literature. It's called Dust, fantastic read, and it's in the horror genre. He also won the TD Children's Literature book for his Hunchback Assignments, and he has his newest book coming out, which is an indie book called Ibrax, A Battle Divine, which is actually a spin-off of a series called Dragon Assassin. We're going to cover the gamut in terms of the whys and hows of Arthur's passions, interests, and career, and it's a fascinating talk that I hope you stick around for. And with that, let's get into our first interview for Why and How. Hello, Arthur Slade. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. As well as can be, considering fall is coming and it's getting chilly out there.
The leaves, the little colors of the leaves. Yeah, it's all great until the snow falls.
Yeah. I just realized somebody's watching this podcast in the middle of summer and they're going, what are those two geezers talking about?
Yeah, take them away to the home because they have no idea what's going on.
That's the wonders. That's the wonders of doing these things, is that they do say the internet is forever. And oftentimes that's for good and bad reasons.
That's right. Let's just make it for good reasons.
Okay, we'll make it for good reasons. Speaking of good reasons, are you treadmilling right now?
I am at this very moment.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Now, for those dozens of people who are watching this inaugural podcast, you may be wondering what exactly that question was all about. That's going to be part of a segment that I try out in this podcast where we raise a mystery at the top of the show, and we're going to answer that mystery or solve that mystery by the end, and we'll get to learn a little bit about our guest and how they do a certain thing. In this case, think about treadmilling and what that all means. And we'll get to that at the end of this podcast. Now, I know art. So we are colleagues, we're friends, we know each other from way back. But I don't think even Art knows this. There's actually a symbolic reason why I chose you to be my first guest for this podcast. And
is it because my name starts with A?
Yes, exactly. No. The symbolic reason is before I started writing books for young readers, I was a playwright, a screenwriter, a radio dramatist, and my audience was primarily adults, right? But after I worked on a family show and a kids series in television, I sort of got interested in trying to write for young readers, but books, not plays, not TV shows, not radio dramas. And now I remember the kinds of books I read when I was a kid, and I thought, no, there's no way any kid of today is going to want to read the kind of books that I read when I was a kid. So I thought, due diligence, I should take a look at modern novels for young readers and get a sense of what kind of stories are being told now. And I thought, you know what, I'll go through the list of award winners, and that'll give me a good gauge of the kind of books that are being written for kids. And so I went through the list of the Governor General's awards for children's literature. And so I came across Dust, right? And I thought, oh, that's a cool title. And I saw the name of the writer, Arthur Slade, and I looked you up and I went, oh, he's in Saskatoon. That's like one province over from me. Like I thought maybe he would have the same sensibilities as I would. I started reading Dust and I couldn't put it down. It was one of those rare books where, you know, like you start reading on page 1 and by the time you close the book, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning and you wonder, you know, how am I going to get up early the next morning to get to work? That was the Dust experience for me. And it made me realize that the kinds of stories for young readers had certainly evolved from, you know, Hardy Boys, the kind of novels that I remember when I was younger. And so I thought, you know, this is definitely a genre. This is the kind of stories that I want to pursue, because if this is sort of the face or the nature of what literature is for young readers, I definitely want to be part of the party. And so, Arthur Slade, thank you for convincing me surreptitiously or by proxy with your book to get me into writing books for kids.
So good. In fact, I have a tear in my eye. Actually, I have a literal tear in my eye. I'm just going to wipe. I'll be right back. I promise.
So this is what happens when somebody stares at a computer too long.
That was not from your story, which was wonderful, I should say. That was an actual, gee, maybe I should have slept more last night too.
Wait a minute, did you have some dust in your eye? Is that what you're trying to
I had dust in my eye. That is what was making me cry so sadly. No, that is really wonderful. I had no idea about that either. So that is a very cool thing that finally Dust inspired somebody, wanted something, you know, all these years of work and finally something happened. But it's really great. And it's one of the, I mean, that's the same thing I did, and the same thing that anybody, you know, most people should do if they're going to get into writing, is they should start, you know, reading other work. And so when I started writing for, you know, children, young adults, that's the exact same path that I took. I read every book I could get my hands on.
Do you remember the first book that you sort of went through when you decided, okay, I'm writing books for young readers?
Yeah, it's funny. The way it happened is I was actually writing books for adults, and which didn't get published, and that's a very good thing for the universe. But somebody had read one of my books and done one of those kind of literary critiques, right? I paid for it, so it wasn't free. And they said, "Oh, this is a really wonderful book that you've written, you know, for young adults." I was so insulted. It's like, what do you mean? Like I'm writing this for adults. Clearly, I didn't know my audience, and that reset my mind to start thinking about writing for young adults. And you know, I don't remember exactly what I started reading, other than, I mean, but when I started to really get into it is about when J.K. Rowling arrived, and then Philip Pullman and those kind of big fantasy authors, and it just made me realize that it was, you know, possible to write really interesting fantasy, and well, in the case of Dust, really what I hope was really interesting horror. And so those are the things that I started reading.
When you were younger, were you a fan of fantasy and horror, or it was only something when you were deciding to write for kids?
I no, when I was a kid, I loved fantasy. I often retell the story of my grade 4 teacher reading us The Hobbit, and that really, you know, changed my life in the sense that I just hadn't heard of anything like that before. I mean, you of course you read a few fantasy tales here and there, but it was just so big. It seemed big until you get into the Lord of the Rings, and that really, you know, that I don't I think that kind of unlocked something creative in me, even though at that point I wasn't really writing, but just that this was an amazing thing that you could go to these other worlds. And as I was growing up and getting into my teens, I read every science fiction novel that I could get my hands on, and kind of from the classic age, kind of Robert Heinlein, Frank Herbert, those type of writers, and into horror. And of course, this is the 80s, so that's when Stephen King was writing all of his best horror novels, and I couldn't put them down. I was just amazed by how real they seemed and how incredibly frightening they were.
Okay, pop quiz. Your favorite Stephen King story?
The Shining
The Shining. Oh, yeah.
still scares me. Yeah, like the movie is nothing compared to the actual book. And again, he had such a gift with characters and with making things feel real, and that's a hard thing to do. Well, with anything that's supernatural or fantasy, that's the whole kind of goal, is to make people believe in that world. And in his case, he has to make people believe that those things exist in our world.
Well, and that raises an interesting question for me, is that whole notion of making things real, right? If you're dealing with like fantasy worlds or supernatural plots, like what is the grounding or what is the anchor for the reader then, if you're dealing with like a world that nobody's seen before or creatures that they may not see down the street. So what do you think
Yeah,
is the thing that grounds the reader or the audience?
I hope they don't see them down the street. If that's the case, you better put the for sale sign up. But
Right.
for me, and I guess I'll go back to Dust. It was really Dust very specifically. I wrote that as a historical novel that had fantasy slash horror kind of elements. And my idea when I was writing it, and I think it worked, was that I wanted people to really feel grounded in how real the world is. They could feel the dust, they could feel how hot the sun was, all that sort of thing. And then just each by a little bit introduce a little bit of a fantastical element. So that by the time, it not so jarring, it's not like a ghost suddenly appearing, which can work in some cases, but not in that book. It's just bit by bit, you're kind of pulled along until you go, oh, okay, I believe in all these other fantasy things that are happening. So that was kind of my kind of I want to say clockwork or TikTok way of doing it, just bit by bit, getting them into there. You believe in this, and then bam, you can kind of let everything go in terms of the supernatural.
Yeah, I like the slow burn kind of story, right? The one that sort of pieces it in. I mean, when you talk about The Shining, it has that same sort of quality of being drawn in, right? There are little hints of what may come, right? And each time you get that little hint or that little spark, it pulls you further into that world, and you go, "What's this all about?" Right? Or why are they doing this at this moment? What are the what are the twins
That's
doing
right.
in the
Yeah,
hallway?
yeah. Why is Jack such a dull boy?
Yeah.
All work and no play.
Have you
But
done that? Have you done that gag when you've got writer's block? Just fill up your screen a few times.
Yeah, I've done that, and just a kind of a bit of a segue. If What I also do when I talk to classes and that sort of thing is just tell them to type down anything. Like I just set a timer and go, I need you to type for a minute, and you put in, you make sure it's words, and try and keep control of them, and maybe turn them into sentences, but just get things out. And so they don't type all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, but they just kind of get the whole kind of physical action of writing. And hopefully it feels like that kind of opens that part of the brain, because when you look back, it doesn't matter if you write a whole, well, kind of a jumble of things. When you look at it, your brain can still kind of put something together, and you can go, oh, there actually is a little bit of potential there. That whole thing where the bat was flying, that would scare somebody.
Now, how did you arrive at that sort of notion of just write and set a timer? Is this something that it came through trial and error, or is it something that you learned in a workshop, a course?
I think it partly came from I did 5 years of advertising before I really got serious into my writing. And not that they set timers and said you got to write an ad in this amount of time, and ding ding ding, you're fired. They didn't do that, although now that I've mentioned it, they might start doing that. Uh, but 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 there was a real sense of writing under pressure, writing quickly, and not being cute about it. And it's totally fine to be literary and to be to be excited and think about the art side of it. But I also, for me, that's kind of like thinking about the ditch digging part of writing, which is you just got to get in there and you just got to shovel, and you got to shovel, 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 and eventually you'll hit something that's good. And so that's where that came from. And it just, to me, the idea of it, and I don't know that I read it somewhere else, but the idea of it made more sense once you had like things like an egg timer, something that actually ticks, lets you know time is going by and that you should be busy right now. And plus, it was a great way if you're talking to a class to get them to work for at least 5 minutes.
Yeah, you can kill a few minutes there.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. Now read the stuff
yeah.
that you just wrote. Barga, 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 barga.
Well, I love the idea. I know that there are some people who, they wait for the muse, like they're standing on the
Yeah,
street looking for the bus to come and realize that they're standing on the wrong bus stop. But I'm in your camp in the sense of you need a little bit of pressure to sort of push you forward. And I love the egg timer thing. I've done that a few times where I just set a
yeah.
timer and go, this is what I need to do in the time that's here. And do you remember the 3-day novel writing contest a few
Yes.
years back?
Yeah.
I participated in that uh, in the worst way possible. If you're an introvert or if you're somebody who's waiting for the muse, I got together with, I think it was like 11 other authors in a chapters bookstore. We all had our sort of computers. Some had laptops, some had a desktop, and not only did we have to write a first draft of a novel over the course of the Labor Day long weekend, but we were doing it in a chapters when customers were walking in and looking over our shoulders and basically judging us as we were trying to
Yeah.
write. And that kind of pressure
Asking
cooker,
you where the bathroom is.
yeah. They're asking you to move because you're sitting in a really comfy chair. This is back when chapters actually had comfy chairs.
Yeah. Oh,
But
that
that
sounds
kind
like
of
a
pressure.
nightmare.
Sorry.
Sounds like a nightmare.
For some people, it would be a nightmare. For me, it was kind of fun because that whole idea of that sort of pressure cooker just helped me to sort of be creative. Because I mean,
Yeah.
my background is I started off as an improviser, so you actually had to make up stories in front of an audience. And if you failed, the audience loved it, and if you succeeded, the audience was like, "Oh, whatever."
Yeah. No, and I think that I think it's good to challenge kind of our assumptions of how our creativity works. And so that's what I like about those kind of tests, or even, learning that you can write faster than you than you really think you can. And that's something that's kind of, I mean, I don't write really quickly compared to some self-published novelists, but I did kind of realize that a lot of my time sometimes writing is just me kind of daydreaming and not even about the book. And it's like, well, maybe if I set a word count, I'll actually write a bit more and not just be, thinking, oh yeah, no, I'm writing, really I am. And then if I set a word count, it makes me get to that point. And even Stephen King sets his 2000 word count, and notice how I just compared myself to Stephen King, but that he sets that word count just so that he said, if he's done at 11, then he can go out and enjoy the rest of the day, or he's there till 4, long as he gets those 2000 words in. And I think it's kind of interesting to think of somebody of that age, who's been doing it for so long, would still do that. And so it isn't I'm waiting for how many ideas, or this is just the amount of time I'm going to write. It's the words. And I think it's important. It's important to find the right way for you to write, but it's also important to test all these different ways and see if they work for you.
Well, and that to me is fascinating, right? Because you're describing the process as a process as opposed to inspirational moments. Yes, we will have those moments of inspiration, but along the way, it's about, like you talked about, like ditch digging. It's like, I got to put in
Yeah.
the hours, I got to put in the words to pull this all together. Now, of course, I'm not saying it's going to be easier now that you've got, publications, books under your belt. Uh, but when you were starting out, like before you had a publishing contract, before, you thought, okay, I could do this full time and actually like make a living at it. What was that moment? What was that moment that was like I guess the light bulb moment that said, okay, I'm going to commit to being like a full-time author, novelist? Or was it just one of those sort of gradual shifts where suddenly you sort of turned around and went, hey, guess what? I'm doing this full time.
I think first of all, I committed to it really early. Like I had started writing my first novel, I think when I was 16, 17. So I committed to the actual writing aspect of it and had this dream. That was my goal. I knew I went to university for 4 years and got an English degree, but really in the back of my head, that was just time I was putting in so that I could eventually get to being a writer. It just wasn't happening right away. And I remember going to a writer in residence here in Saskatoon, and she said to me, it'll be at least 10 years before you'll actually be able to do this as a living, and
10 years.
before,
Okay.
yeah, she said 10 years. And it turns out she was wrong because it took me 12. But yeah, and that's more that to make it as a living. But it really, for me, I wasn't published till I was 30, but I had written 6 novels before that weren't published. I was later able to tear some of them apart again, kind of like zombies, and make them into something else. But that time period. I was just kept dreaming. How am I going to make this? I need to push this to the point where I will make it as a living. And then finally, when I had my first book published, like it became a bestseller. It's called Draugr, and it was published by Orca Books, and by bestseller, that doesn't mean it sold like J.K. Rowling. It meant it sold 5,000 copies, which is a bestseller in Canada, which when you look at my contract, I made $4,000. And suddenly it's like, wait a sec. That's when I first realized, I mean, it's so hard to get published, and perhaps in some ways even harder these days. But, you know, the great, wonderful goal of finally getting published is wonderful, it's amazing. It feels so good. But then the realization hits that you have to sell a lot of books to make a living at it, or you have to have more kind of irons in the fire. And it wasn't until I got to, I was kind of surviving on grants, doing school visits here and there, but I wasn't really well known, so schools didn't want me. And it really wasn't until Dust, when I wrote Dust, which was my fourth novel, and when it came out, I decided at that point that the thing that I needed to make this into a real living was I needed an agent, I needed to be with a bigger publisher, and it needed to be published in other countries, or else you just because you do the same amount of work, but if it's published in another country, you get paid twice as much, right? So, and for each country, you get paid more. So that was my plan. It's hard to make those happen, but I did. I was lucky that I had an offer from HarperCollins. I approached, I think it was like 17 or 18 agents in New York because I wanted a New York
Oh,
agent,
wow.
and
Okay.
out of all of them, only one wanted to read the rest, even though I had a contract from HarperCollins that they could negotiate. It was HarperCollins Canada, so they didn't really care about that. And only one of them got back to me and said, "Yeah, I'll take you on." But he was able to sell it to HarperCollins and then sell it to Random House, and I wasn't suddenly rich, but then I was making enough money and more. Then the book won the Governor General's Award, which is just in Canada. It's just a really, it's a well-known award and it's prestigious and it comes with a bit of money. But what it did is it got my name out there, and it meant that for the next year to year and a half, it just felt like a, a long time to me, in that every school wanted you to come, every library. I went to nearly every province in Canada. I still haven't been to Newfoundland. That's the only province I haven't seen yet.
Oh,
And
wow.
so just that, so it opened up, it made the book sell more. But what it did maybe more so at that time period was sold me more because people got to know who I was and then would invite me out to things. And I don't know if things are the same these days because it's a much different market, and there's aren't as many. Well, there used to be something called teacher librarians back then who were amazingly supportive, and I know there's still some out there, but it's not the same as it was.
No, they're under siege right now. I know in my province of Alberta, I think I know of one sort of position of a teacher librarian that sort of exists. It's
Yeah,
the budget is strung out between I think two or three schools, but everybody else, it's either a library tech or a parent volunteer who's
yeah.
running books through the scanner. So if by any chance anybody who is watching this is from Ontario, there is a petition now going out to save our school librarians, and that petition is a pretty important one. I'll pop it in the link if you want to sign and support the teacher librarian position in Ontario. So sorry, that was a wasn't intentional, but thank you for opening the door to
No,
putting the word out
it's
for school and teacher librarians.
yeah, no. Well, I'm very happy to because it really because in Saskatchewan too, they've cut back. So we have teacher librarians, but they often have like 4 or 5 schools. They're oh, I'm here Tuesday to Thursday, and it's not. It's just they're just not able to dedicate the amount of time to the same students in the same school, and they don't. They just didn't have the same time to also go, hey, we should get a writer in and let's go through all that whole rigmarole of getting a grant or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's a shame that our society has stepped back a bit from that. And I think, yeah, go sign that petition. That's all I really want to say.
Okay, thank you, Art. I think the school, the teacher librarians will put a thank you to you as well for putting that plug out there.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
coming back to sort of that whole notion of supporting yourself, whether you're a full-time author or part-time author, I think it's important for people to recognize that choosing this career is not the easiest one. So like the romantic notion of I'm going to have that one hit and it's going to like I'll be fine for the rest of my life. Maybe if you're lucky, right? If you're of the caliber of like a J.K. Rowling or a Stephen King, you can live off those royalties and maybe translate things into movies. But for 99% of the other authors who are making a living and are doing this seriously, it's nice to hear that you have to piece together grant applications, you have to do school
yeah,
visits, do that
yeah,
traveling in order to pay the bills, and it's still part and parcel with what you do and what you love, but it is very much part of a job. So it's great to hear you sort of round out what it exactly means to be an author, a working and successful author, that it's not just sitting in your cabin. Do you have a cabin? No,
no,
you don't have a cabin.
not anymore. We sold it. Couldn't afford it anymore.
Wait a minute, an author can't afford a cabin. Oh no.
Well, but you're right. Because the image I had when I started out and wanted to be a writer was the image on the back of the Lord of the Rings, where J.R.R. Tolkien is holding a pipe and sitting at his desk. And it's like, I mean, except for the pipe part, is the pipe is great. The smoking part not so good, but that's what I thought it would be. It's just you write a book and then people will think you're amazing, and then you write another book. Wow, a few years later, and it wasn't that at all. It's work, and it's this constant kind of adapting and running around. And it's the life I chose, and I'm very happy with it. But it's not that original image. Is not it's The original image is an author is static. They sit there, they write the book comes out, the money comes in. They sit there, they write another book. But we're not static. We're actually moving all around trying to do other things and write the book.
Speaking of doing other things, I do know you also have a marketing hat on when you're promoting your work. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because I know, again, that sort of notion of sitting back and letting somebody else do things. I always remember the one lesson that I learned when I published my first book. I was like, yes, the publisher may have a publicity person, or if they have a big enough budget, they'll have a publicity person
Yeah.
and a marketing person. But those people get paid whether or not your book sells. As long as
Mhm.
something in
Yeah.
that particular season sells, they've done their job, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your book. So I often tell people who are starting out in this field, you have to be your own advocate when it comes to promoting your work. And I know that you've been a really great advocate of your own work, as well as being an advocate for other people's work. Can you talk a little bit
Mhm.
about sort of what you do in terms of trying to get your name and your books out there to the general public?
Yeah, I think is especially more so in the past when a book would come out, I would always look for a way that would make it interesting to other people. And I think one of the examples is I have a novel called Flickers, which is set in 1920s Hollywood, partly set in Alberta, lovely province next door, and
Yay!
also yeah, just wanted to get some of those Alberta book readers and steal them from you. And but uh, also it's because it's set kind of during the silent film era. I thought, well, I have to do something interesting for it. And what I did is I ended up renting the theater here from 1930s here in Saskatoon, and instead of going to different schools, had all the schools come down to the theater, and I wore a tux. I had a whole presentation, and it was, I have to say, it was one of the funnest things I've ever done in terms of being a writer, just to go and walk into a room and my now my presentations don't match what you do, but it was a pretty darn good presentation with all these kind of film, because you have the whole theater screen, right? So I'm playing kind of old films, and I even had an old film I made of myself so that I was up on the screen while the kids are also looking at me, going, So I'm kind of interacting a bit with that, and it was just, there was a point, where. In fact, I have a film at the very start of me on the screen before I come into the room, urging all the students to cheer as loud as they could. And so if you can imagine walking into a room of 500 kids who are all just screaming at the top of their lungs, and then you come out in a white suit, it was just hilarious and so much fun. And so we got, I didn't sell that many books that day, which is, one of my goals. Partly because they could buy popcorn too. And I
Oh,
think
you you got trumped by popcorn. Oh,
so yeah, it was a theater. I mean, the theater wasn't going to say no. And but what it really did is that, all those teachers, all those students, I still run into people now. It was in 2014, I think. I still run into people who go, "Oh, I was at that. That was so great."
and did you have to sweep up the the theater after?
The popcorn, yeah, yeah. No, no, I was in a white suit. I couldn't
Oh,
do
oh
all
yeah.
that work.
And
But
where's
you're
that white
right.
suit now? Where's that white suit now?
Yeah, yeah. No, that was a rental. That was a white. Never wore a white tux before. Haven't since. But yeah, yeah. But you're right in all these different jobs you have to do. And I think the other thing, and you know all about this too, is that you have to adapt. You have to, like, I've been doing this for 27 years now. And so the industry changes. Publishers go out of business. I mean, when my third book came out, there was a distributor that went out of business. So that book just totally tanked because no, it wasn't going anywhere. People couldn't buy it, so it vanished. And then the next crop of books comes up and replaces it. And so you just have to adjust to those things. You have to go, okay, that didn't work, what can I do next? And even, not everything's. I used to think that your career would be rising up, getting better and better, and eventually you're like a multi bestseller, and after that everything's easy. But really, my career, at least, and I imagine most people, other than again the aforementioned J.K. Rowling and Stephen King, goes up and comes down and goes up and comes down, and you have to adjust to each one of those, peaks and valleys. And an adjustment for me was probably about I had, like, with one of my series, the Hunchback Assignments was published in, I think, 8 or 9 different countries, and was probably the biggest kind of literary success I'd had. And but it didn't do very well in the States. And by the time my next book came out, the publishers didn't want it. They looked at they still looked at the last 2 books in my series and said those didn't sell very well. So this book you have here probably won't sell very well. And so suddenly because Europeans also often look at who's selling in the States before they buy the rights to your book. So suddenly this whole market kind of closed off, where I thought, oh, I'm growing, I'm growing, I'm growing, and then it goes away. And that's where I started moving more towards self-publishing and making, and I make a better living now in many ways than I did when I was publishing with publishers. And I do a hybrid of both, but I really had to, and I say this like this all happened immediately. It was years of learning how to, do Facebook advertising, Amazon advertising, all these different things. But I had to do it, or else I had to get a real job. And I was getting too old to have a real job.
Oh, that's a great segue into sort of the next thing I want to ask you about, was this whole notion of self-publishing, or what we would call indie publishing in some circles.
Mhm.
It is a challenging field to get into, right? Because as we sort of alluded to earlier, right, when you were promoting your books, you're very much the person who has to do all that work. Now you add on top of that, the work of being a publisher. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you had to consider when you decided to self-publish your novels.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, it was actually a lot harder to get into because there weren't programs to, turn your work into an ebook. You had to do all this coding, and it was a complicated thing. And then but now I'll flash forward to the present. The present's really easy. You can buy an app, you upload your Word program into it, and it spits it out and turns it all into ebooks. So that's kind of simple in a way, at least simpler than it was. And you also have to, you need a cover. So you have to pay someone to make a cover. And so I've gone through the process of finding different artists, some here in Canada, others as far away as Hungary and even Australia, and get them to do the cover and make sure that they're doing the cover exactly so that it matches the genre that you're writing in, because that's really important in self-publishing, that you don't want to look different than everybody else. It sounds weird. You want to look the same, because then all those readers on Amazon and who have Kobos, they want to read the same book as they read last time, most of them.
Oh,
They're
interesting.
they're not they're not multi omnivorous readers, like, at least how I was kind of like, I'll read nonfiction and fiction. I mean, I read mostly fantasy and that sort of thing, but I jump around. Those people want, very specific things. And so that's why if you have the same, your cover looks like everybody else's, you have a better chance of them choosing it. And so you have to learn, I had to learn that. And then I had to learn, the whole process of, well, how do I get people to know about my book? I'm not going into schools now because the schools don't care about ebooks. And I'm aiming at an older market, even though I'm still writing kind of young adult. And so I started taking courses on Facebook advertising and on advertising on Twitter. And then you just, unfortunately, and this is a hard part of it, you have to spend money. Like, you have to take a risk on seeing how much money you put into these ads and how much will come back to you. And the good thing about that is there are, again, apps that you can calculate. So I have a program on my computer. So if I spend, $25, $100 on Facebook ads, and some days I would spend at least $100 a day, I that same day I could look and see how many books sold and whether I was making a profit. And so these are all things that sound foreign when you first start out. When you first start out, it was almost unpure to think about, well, that money part of it. I mean, you wanted to make the money, but you didn't want to have to think about all the percentages and all that sort of thing. But once you're self-publishing, you have to think about that a lot more. And what I found is I still get the same amount of time to write. And I think I'm probably even more prolific than I was but what the advertising kind of replaces the time I used to spend going to schools or going to bookstores and, presenting my work. Now that's time is spent at home, working on the advertising.
Oh, that's great to hear. And so when just hearing what you're talking about, it's like another skill set that you've had to develop, right? And sort of touching on that theme of adapting or pivoting to whatever happens. You go, okay, I'm not going to do the school visits. My audience or my readers are going to change. They're going to be older. They're going to be looking for ebooks. So I have to identify, you know, what are the things that they look for when they're trying to find a book. And that's news to me, the idea that trying to make your cover similar to other books. Like I'm like, oh wow, that's a really cool nugget to hang on to. Like if you go into that whole notion of ebooks, that you have to really, I guess it comes back to that sort of trope that we all sort of rely on as writers, is know your audience. In this case, you have to
Yeah.
really know your demographic and figure out like what are the things that prompt them from oh yeah to oh yeah, let me click the buy button over here.
Yeah, well, and you're still creative. You're being creative, and I mean, I don't love writing ads, right? But you don't have to do a lot of work. Sometimes you just have to find the right ad that works, and you can use it if they have kind of a half life, I guess, over time. But you can use it for a long time before you have to replace it with something else. So I like the creativity of that. I like the control. I like the fact that, when you sell a book through a publisher, you make 10%. And when I sell it, through Amazon or Kobo, then you make 80%. And so you don't have to sell as many books in order to make the same living. And I think that the curious thing about audience that I've found, yeah, and I keep meaning to write an article about this or Substack about this, is that you become less famous, even though my books have probably sold more, and in fact, than they have in the 20 years of publishing with publishers. I've probably sold more copies as a self-publisher now. I think it's just about even at this point. And but if you those people won't who bought it as an ebook won't necessarily know your name. They don't follow you as an author. So I have this series, Dragon Assassin, and it has sold, in the hundreds of thousands of copies as an ebook. And most of those people won't know who I am because they are just going from one dragon book to the next dragon book to the next dragon book, which is, this isn't a criticism of them. That's how they read. I'm glad there's readers. I'm so happy there's readers. But Arthur Slade, the writer, is only a few of them will kind of tag along and go, oh, I wonder what else he's going to write. But and the way I know that it doesn't that they don't read my other work is my other work doesn't sell in ebooks. So the drag, you'd think that I have another fantasy novel called Crimson, and that book doesn't sell hardly at all because it doesn't have a dragon on the front. So they don't buy it. Dust doesn't sell to them anyway, because it's just a weird, creepy dude, and it looks like 1930s,
Can't you have
Saskatchewan. I'm
like
not
a
going to read
dust
that.
dragon?
That's I know that's yeah, the sequel. So it's kind of in some ways it's humbling, but it's also to me really interesting because it's just this is how audiences work. And for me the way to make kind of uh, living is the way to make your best impact when you're self-publishing is to find a niche that is big enough that you can make a living from it. And apparently, so far, dragon, dragon rider niche, kind of like Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders, that niche of people are just big enough for me to make a living at it. So far, I should say, because things always change.
Is it an intentional move on your part to try to create a franchise? Because I think about like this series with the Hunchback assignments, right? And now with Dragon
Yeah.
Assassin sort of now spinning off with Ibrax, which we're going to talk about in just a second here. So is that intentional that you're thinking I'm going to build a series as opposed to I'm building just sort of a one and done kind of story?
I think intentional would make it sound like I had a plan from the very beginning. I think my first plan was to write like this book, which is a new book in a new series set in the Dragon Assassin world. I first wrote the Dragon Assassin series, which is all about an assassin who rides a dragon. I just found that was kind of a funny idea. What's more dangerous than an assassin who rides a dragon? And and so at first I was just thinking, well, it's just going to be three novels. And I wrote those three novels and I thought, well, there's still a little bit more I can add. And so I wrote another novel and then another novel. So there's five novels, which is almost the same number of words as The Lord of the Rings. So I was kind of happy about that. It's like, wow, I'm just about getting up to not the heights and sales, but the height as far as number of words. And so, we have our goals, right, that we aim for. But by that point, that's like, 4 or 5 years of my life. And and I and I've created this whole land and have all this huge variety of characters. And it just seemed wrong for me to step away from it and to just go, okay, I'm going to just go to something else completely different. And it just seemed like there's so much more rich things I could kind of look at. And so it is a franchise in that sense, and it is something that I'm working on film scripts and I'm looking at a graphic novel, and so I would love to have it expand into kind of different areas. But uh, going to Ibrax was really just more. I had actually started another book that is set in the same world called Wizard Assassin, which is about the brother of the about the assassin who rides the dragon, the Wizard Assassin. I started writing that, and I was enjoying it. But someone suggested to me, who had read the other book, said, "Well, how come you're not writing about the dragon?" I said, "Oh, that's like the perfect thing. I have to write from the dragon's point of view because he is so sarcastic, and I never am. I never am. But he's so sarcastic and so much doesn't like humans and just hates everything. And yet you can tell he's got a heart of gold. And at least or he'll eat hearts of gold. I forget which one it was. But it really just kind of, it's like anytime you're a writer, you go, bam, that's it. This is going to write itself. It didn't. I had to put the work in. But that's that it made it easy because I already, in terms of kind of a franchise, I already had the world there. I already had the characters he's all used to, and I didn't really have to do a lot of heavy lifting to bring that story kind of to life in a sense.
Is it difficult or is it easy to sort of slide into like another character's point of view, or do you feel like sometimes you're sort of pulled into that world that you created and you go, oh, I want to sort of stay in this lane and I want to make something different, but at the same time I want to, you know, stay in something familiar? Like, how do you navigate that sense of creating something that's new and exciting, but at the same time old and familiar for the readers who go, I came here because I want the dragon assassin. I might put up with a wizard assassin, but now you're talking about a dragon.
That's right. The you want to stay close to what the readers expect, at least if it's a franchise. I mean, you know, if Rocky suddenly started fighting aliens, you go, well, this is wrong.
I would be there.
Unless, I know, unless it was a good one.
Rocky against
Maybe
Predator. Rocky against Predator. I'm just saying that right
actually,
now.
now that I say that, that really works. But it was. I think for Brax, it was easy to find his voice because he had spoken so much in the other novels as you know, not a background character, and he'd certainly argue that he wasn't a background character, but just his personality was overshadows, or at least shadows, you know, the other characters. They're just so always kind of in awe of the things he thinks of and the horrible things he might sometimes do. And so that was easier. I think that the difficulty is, am I still just writing the same novel as I was before? And I think that it's the trick is finding enough interesting and new things to put in that make it feel fresh, make it feel new. And once I changed it to his voice, that was one of those things, but also story wise to make it seem the same and different enough that you can bring them along. And and a lot of that, it's easy to say afterwards, that, oh, that's what you do. A lot of that kind of happened along the way, in terms of while I was writing. I was, okay, what can I do that's slightly different than I did before?
For me, it comes down to character, right? Like, if you didn't have a strong, fully formed character in Brax in the first incarnation in
Yeah.
Dragon Assassin, I don't think you'd have the kind of legs that you have in Ibrax, which I read and I love. And so anybody who wants a chance to get it, definitely, where would we get that? Art?
Yeah, if you go there, shadowpress.com is the publisher, and you can go to their website and order it right now, or any bookstore. It's already online. You can pre-order it there too.
And would you recommend reading Dragon Assassin first in order to appreciate Ibrax?
Well, that was the other trick, because you know there's already 5 novels. Even though this is a separate series, it does have some of the same characters, and it does make references. So if you want to, you can go and read those first 5 books. I think they're lots of fun, and well, obviously, if I'm going to spend 4 years writing them, I better like them. And I think you would probably get more of a kick out of Ibrax. But if you haven't read them, I there's it only has a few references back to what happened in the past because this is a new story. So you don't have to read them. You can read Ibrax and then go, oh, how did these two meet? And then go back and read the other ones.
Okay, that's great. All right, so for anybody who's watching, definitely check out Ibrax. If you're a fan of fantasy novels, if you're a fan of dragons, definitely check it out. But if you like assassins, you might want to get the full set as well. Okay,
That's right.
we're coming to the end of my time with you. I don't want to overstay my welcome. As I asked at the beginning of the podcast, are you treadmilling right now? And if you remember, Art's answer was
Yes.
no.
And
Explain to us what exactly that all means.
well, what that means is that I do all my writing on a treadmill desk, and that means it's a middle age thing. Just get older. Anyway, we don't want to hear about it. But I wanted to stay healthy. So right now I am walking. That's why I'm not actually doing an impression of trying to hypnotize people. I'm walking on my treadmill desk, and this is how I walk and write at the same time, so that I can get my novels done and my exercise in at the same time. And just to show you, there's my little keypad. Oh, there's my passport if you want to go anywhere. And I will step off my treadmill desk, and hopefully you can see it's just down there. I'll point towards it. Right there is the treadmill desk. And oh, I wish I had vacuumed the floor. And so I'm going to try not to step on it and just go flying back in the room, because that would be really make the bloopers on the on on this interview. Oh, now it's automatically shutting down because it knew I'd stepped off it.
Oh, excellent. So thank you for
Yeah. Oh,
sharing
no,
with us that.
you're
Oh, there
welcome.
we go. There you go. So
Yeah,
thanks for
I'm
sharing
really
that. So now
happy to
you know
work.
the how of how an author can write and exercise at the same time. Hopefully that's a mystery solved, a mystery that you've been interested in. I know. Well, okay. If kids, if you're watching this, you probably don't care about exercising while you're writing. But for those who may be of a certain vintage, like myself, it is something. In fact, I think there have been a few authors that have picked up the whole treadmill
Yeah,
desk, right?
yeah. John Green, I know, is one, and there's a few others
I
out
think
there.
Martha Skripchik, I think, or does she
Yeah,
go for walks, or does she do?
Alice Kuipers, Jan Martel.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, oh
Did you
yeah,
start that trend? Did you start?
everybody's so influenced by, well, not John Green. I can
Okay.
claim Yan and Ellie.
Okay. Would you consider your next project Arthur Slade, fitness instructor and
Right.
writing guru?
Yeah, middle-aged writing group. Yeah, it's a pretty. I'll get that on a T-shirt.
Just think about it. The next writing retreat, there'd just be treadmills set up all along there.
It'll just be me there.
Just for you. Oh, so thank you so much for taking the time to spend talking to us about your why and your how. Folks, remember, support your local author, and if you can, get out to a bookstore and pick up copies of Art Slade's books. Take the time to check out his website, arthurslade.com, and give him some love, give him some support. We all understand like how difficult it can be to be an author, and anytime an author receives some kind of support, it's always a good thing. So thank you, Art, for being part of this, and thank you to our audience for sticking around and watching this, and stay tuned for our next podcast coming up, hopefully in an indeterminate amount of time. I'll probably cut that part out, but thanks very much.